Good evening, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about living the question mark. Now, what exactly does that mean, you might be wondering, but we will get to that shortly. First, we are going to be reading from Mark 11 for Palm Sunday. And this ties into living the question mark. So this is when Jesus comes to Jerusalem, and the crowds, people of Jerusalem, all celebrate his arrival. So Mark 11. When Jesus and his followers approached Jerusalem, they came to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives. Jesus gave two disciples a task, saying to them, "Go into the village over there. As soon as you enter it, you will find tied up there a colt that no one has ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'Its master needs it, and he will send it back right away.'" They went around and found a colt tied to a gate outside on the street, and they untied it. Some people standing around said to them, "What are you doing, untying that colt?" They told them just what Jesus said, and they left him alone. They brought the colt to Jesus and threw their clothes upon it, and he sat on it. Many people spread out their clothes in the road, while others spread branches cut from the fields. Those in front of him and those following were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessings on the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessings on the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest." Jesus entered Jerusalem and went to the temple. After he looked around at everything, because it was already late in the evening, he returned to Bethany with his 12. So, you might have heard, probably heard that before, or versions of it. And it's the celebration of Jesus arriving to Jerusalem. And many people would have come to Jerusalem from the countryside at this time to celebrate Passover, spreading their cloaks and spreading palm branches before Jesus as he arrived was both a token of a way of honoring him and a way of rejoicing Jesus. And they cried Hosanna, right? Now this was a Hebrew invocation to God that meant save us and help us. It's only later that Hosanna became a cry of joy. And what else did they say? So they cried out Hosanna, and they also said blessings on the coming kingdom of our ancestor of David. Now, this lets us know what kind of Messiah that they were hoping for, that they were hoping Jesus was. The people thought that Jesus was coming as a king who would restore their power and their freedom as in the past time of King David. The one who would restore their nation to its former glory. And Jesus did come to bring restoration, but at a very different kind, right? He wasn't king of the people that was going to restore them to power. His restoration had to do with the healing of relationships between people and God and creation. And this is very different from what the people expected. And even the disciples didn't entirely understand what was happening. So the people didn't entirely realize as Jesus made his way to Jerusalem, as they waved their palm fronds and spread out their cloaks in front of him, who Jesus really was, even as they celebrated him. So there's a Danish philosopher and theologian from a long time ago, Kierkegaard, and he said, life can only be understood backwards. We must live it forward. What does this mean? So it means that life can only be understood backwards. So you could only really understand things when you're looking back on it, right? Because at the time, but that's not how we live. We don't live backwards, we live moving forwards, but we can't really always understand things when we're in them at the time. Now, there's times in our lives when there's lots of important changes happening and changes that often happen really fast. But because we're in the midst of those changes and living in them, we can't really understand the full extent about what is going on. And it's only looking back at that time later on that we can fully understand that change that was occurring. So think about the invention of cars, for instance. So we know now, looking back at that time, just what a big influence the invention of cars has had on our society and our world. It's brought about a ton of change. And we know that because we can look back on it and see what happened. But do you think people at that time, when the first cars were on the streets, going around saying, wow, we're living in a time of great historical change? Probably not so much. I mean, they probably appreciated and understood that there were lots of new things happening and being developed, but they couldn't have known how much these things would affect society moving forward because you can't. So the same way that the people of Jerusalem at that time, when Jesus arrived, they couldn't fully appreciate what was happening at that time, even as they welcomed him. So think about the time we're in right now. Lots of changes going on right now, right? As we're dealing with the COVID pandemic. Important changes are occurring as we speak and have changed. Things have changed a lot in the past year. Here we are, almost exactly a year from when this all started. Actually, I was going to check the date of the first video lesson I did for you guys, because I think it was like right around now. It might be the 1 year anniversary, but somewhere around now. And even with all these changes, you probably have hopes and expectations and desires about the future. That's natural. But at the same time, you can't know exactly what's coming down the line and what is going to happen. And what you expect or what you want may or may not happen. But later on, when you look back at this time, you'll probably understand it a lot better. So it can be hard to hold on to those hopes and have those expectations, but also at the same time know that you can't really know what the future will bring. So you can imagine for the people of Jerusalem that were welcoming Jesus, it must have been very unsettling to them, in that they knew something important was happening, but they didn't quite know what to do with it because they couldn't entirely understand what was happening amid that great time of change while they were living it. So that's where the living a question mark comes in, because they were living a question mark then because they didn't know what was going to happen. There was so much change happening so fast, so they couldn't really appreciate what would happen in the future, and couldn't understand what was happening until later look back on it. So just like we're living in this time of great change now, we're sort of living in a question mark right now, right? Imagine looking back on this time and thinking about how it has affected your own lives and the whole world. What a big impact, right? We can't understand how yet because we're still in the middle of it. So we are living a question mark. So we're coming to the end of Lent, and Lent is a time of reflection. So I want you, for your assignment this week, you're going to have a little bit more of a longer assignment. So I want you to look back on your past year of the pandemic and think about yourself a year ago compared to yourself now, and what you couldn't have known at the time then when the pandemic was all starting, but that you've learned now. And how have you changed in that year? And then do some thinking about how we as a community or a larger society has changed in ways that nobody could have predicted as we're living this question, right? Think about a year ago, we were thinking, oh yeah, maybe by fall I can go on that trip I was going to go to. So here we are a year later, and really dependent on those vaccinations that thankfully are rolling out, and thanks to science that they were able to be rolled out so quickly, even though it felt like a while, but a year is really fast for that to happen. So your assignment, I want you, as you're thinking about those things, I want you to write a letter to yourself a year ago. And what would you advise your younger self while it's living this question mark? What do you understand now looking back that you didn't understand then? What things happened in the past year that you didn't expect? Were there things that you were worrying about at the beginning of this pandemic that ended up turning okay after all. So how would you might want to comfort your younger self and yourself from a year ago, that what would you say to comfort them about the things that are to come? So this should be fun. It could be a short little letter, but just think about some of those things. What would you say as we are living this question mark? And as we started living that question mark a year ago, what would you say to yourself a year ago, as you now have a better understanding of the things that have occurred? So I hope you have fun writing your letter. Happy Palm Sunday and happy spring. We just had the spring equinox, so that's very exciting. Enjoying the sunshine. I hope you all enjoy it too. So I will see you next time. Be kind to yourselves, be kind to others, and have a great week.